Hello guys, Croft is here. The question at the heart of Prometheus is deceptively simple. If the engineers created humanity, then who created the engineers? When Elizabeth Shaw examines their DNA and finds it to be a near-perfect match with human DNA, the implication is staggering. Not only are we connected, but we may be part of a deliberate lineage. Yet Shaw immediately asks the only logical follow-up: if they made us, who made them? That single question transforms the film from a story about origins into a recursive philosophical puzzle. Even the film's opening, where a lone engineer sacrifices himself, hints at cycles of creation and destruction. On top of that, the deleted material suggests a hierarchy among engineers, including elder figures and ritualized sacrifice, implying that even they may serve a larger system or purpose. There are 6 major theories that explain who created the engineers, and the more you look into it, the stranger the answer becomes. Therefore, we're going to examine this question in detail, moving from the most surface-level theories to the darkest and the most radical explanations, ones that fundamentally reshape everything we think we know about the alien universe. The first theory proposes that the Prometheus engineers themselves were created by the space jockey race seen in Alien of 1979. This explanation begins with the obvious visual and structural differences between the two. The space jockey discovered on LV-426 is massive, far larger than any engineer depicted in Prometheus. Its body appears to be fused with biomechanical technology, suggesting a level of integration between organism and machine that engineers never quite reach. The Juggernaut ship on LV-223 strongly resembles the derelict ship from Alien, but not perfectly. It feels like a derivative or a standardized version, but not the original. These differences hint that engineers are not the original architects of this technology, but inheritors or replicators of it. Further supporting this theory is the uniformity of the engineers themselves. The sacrificial engineer in the opening scene and the awakened engineer share nearly identical physical traits, down to facial structure and proportions. This visual similarity evokes the idea of manufactured beings, perhaps engineered for function rather than individuality. If the space jockeys were a more ancient, more advanced species, they may have created the engineers as biological instruments, biodrones, or a workforce designed to seed life, terraform planets, and manage biological experimentation across the galaxy. Therefore, according to this theory, the engineers are not gods, but tools of a higher order, tasked with creation, yet not creators in the ultimate sense. However, the second theory shifts the focus away from hierarchical creators and instead proposes that the engineers emerged from the black goo itself. The black liquid introduced in Prometheus and further explored in later entries like Alien Romulus behaves less like a substance and more like a primordial force beyond our comprehension. It mutates, reshapes, and generates life in the most unpredictable ways. Scientists struggle to classify it because it defies conventional biological categories. It is neither fully alive nor inert. It operates with a kind of chaotic, generative logic, producing organisms that reflect both creation and destruction simultaneously. In the deleted scene, David described the black goo as a primordial ooze ripe with advanced nanoparticles. It's essentially a form of radical AI. It generates a unique reaction to every genome it encounters. In Alien Romulus, android Rook is further fascinated with this substance and describes it as a unique non-Newtonian fluid, life in its most primal and unadulterated form. This microorganism can be the most destructive pathogen ever observed. If we take these observations into account, the black goo is not a tool but a foundational element of life in the universe, something like a cosmic seed. Just as life on Earth emerged from water through chemical evolution, the engineers may have originated from vast black goo oceans. We know that life is impossible without water, but only life as we understand it. The black goo could act as an alternative solvent capable of producing life radically different from our own, ultimately giving rise to the engineers. Their homeworld may once have contained massive oceans and lakes of this black liquid that later disappeared. Just as humans cannot exist without water, the engineers may depend on the black goo, meaning its laws could have driven them to near extinction. This would explain their reverence for that liquid, as well as their role in distributing it across planets. Many people miss that, though engineer performed the ceremony, it's the goldish black goo that was the catalyst of life, which is why the urn was on the pedestal in the temple. Therefore, rather than being created by another race, the engineers could have emerged from the black goo oceans, so they are descendants of a cosmic process rather than a conscious creator. These are the most plausible surface-level theories, but now we're starting to descend into the true depths of the rabbit hole. And I have to warn you that the next explanation is truly radical. The third theory challenges one of the most entrenched assumptions in the franchise, that engineers created the Xenomorphs. However, if we closely examine the clues in the movies, it could be the exact opposite. It could be that Xenomorphs may have preceded and even created engineers. It might seem like a totally absurd idea, however, the evidence is undeniable. There is often an implicit assumption in sci-fi that every civilization is created by something more advanced. However, in reality, the progress isn't always linear. Civilizations do not just evolve, they can also decay. One example is Europe in the Dark Ages after the fall of Rome. So when it comes to the engineers, that decay might completely invert the origin story we thought we understood. The central idea is that the Xenomorphs created the engineers as perfect caretakers, and eventually Xenos regressed into a more hostile and animalistic version of themselves. This is where the parallel with humanity and androids like David and Walter becomes crucial. Humans, recognizing their own flaws, violence, irrationality, and tribalism, create machines to embody their ideal and perfect traits: logic, precision, and obedience. A flawed species builds a more controlled successor to compensate for its own limits. Just as we build more intelligent tools to take care of us in the same pattern, an older xenomorph civilization may have created the engineers as beings capable of managing their ecosystems, helping them reproduce, and maintaining order and comfort. This theory is wild, but it holds together more than you'd expect once you start connecting the details. According to this theory, the engineers did not necessarily intend to create humanity. The opening scene of Prometheus is not necessarily the origin of human life, but rather one of many experiments, possibly an attempt by engineers to seed life in environments suitable for their creators. That shift alone reframes the entire narrative. The biggest piece of evidence is the xenomorph-like mural in Prometheus. Engineers are clearly depicted revering this organism. It is framed in a crucifix pose, an unmistakable visual language of divinity. There is no alternative explanation in the film for why this creature would be presented in this way, unless it held godlike status, not as something they created, but something that created them. And then there is David. In Alien Covenant, he appears to create a xenomorph-like organism, But he's not starting from scratch. He worked with the black liquid, which already contains alien DNA. Even the novelization confirms David found an ancient xenomorph egg and replicated it. Therefore, David is not the xenomorph creator, he is a reverse engineer. So where did the xenomorphs come from and why would they create the engineers? The theory suggests that xenomorphs were once an ancient, highly advanced civilization. Over time, they merged biology with technology, becoming the biomechanical entities we recognize. But that evolution came at a cost. They replaced natural reproduction with artificial systems, eventually losing their ability to reproduce naturally. They intertwined their biology so much with machines that they had no choice but to reproduce through artificial means. Eggs, facehuggers, and a biological host. Total dependence on technology led to collapse. This theory may seem far-fetched, but we are already seeing glimpses of it in our society. Fertility has collapsed in the last few decades across the globe as both males and females became less fertile. Therefore, it's not inconceivable that in a few decades, most human embryos will be grown in artificial womb sacs. So when xenomorphs were facing extinction, they created the engineers as their caretakers. Biological androids or drones designed to preserve and propagate xenomorph DNA across the galaxy. So the space jockey wasn't transporting a military cargo, but a batch of embryos of its creators. Just like Walter was guarding human embryos in Covenant. This perfectly explains the engineer's actions, transporting urns, seeding planets, and searching for viable hosts. The space jockey in Alien wasn't a war pilot, he was executing a preservation protocol. The same logic applies to the launch of the ship towards Earth in Prometheus. Not just destruction for its own sake, but resurrection of their creators. The engineer rushed to launch the deadly cargo ship in Prometheus towards Earth with almost robotic precision. But the goal wasn't to kill humans, but use them as harvest, as perfect hosts to resurrect xenomorphs. If xenomorphs were once intelligent, why do they now behave like animals? Two explanations emerge. First, the loss of culture. Intelligence is not purely biological, it is learned. Without a society to teach and transmit knowledge, each new xenomorph starts from zero. And there are many real-world parallels. Humans raised in total isolation in a lab, or raised by wild animals, often develop only basic cognitive abilities, barely exceeding animal behavior. Feral children raised with no human contact is the prime example. Second, technological dependence. If a species relies entirely on machines, its natural cognitive abilities atrophy. It is the calculator effect at an extreme scale. Over generations, unused mental functions degrade. We are already seeing early versions of this in our world. People outsource memory and navigation to computers, and now even thinking itself to AI models like ChatGPT. So it's not inconceivable to think that if people are too lazy to think, in a few generations society will drastically regress. Studies have even shown that early humans had significantly larger brains than us. Because tens of thousands of years ago, survival demanded constant awareness and recall. Modern life, on the other hand, requires far less. Now imagine that trend pushed to its limit. This narrative aligns perfectly with one of the core themes of the Alien franchise, the danger of technological overreach. The films repeatedly reinforce this warning. Intelligent tools like androids, David and Ash, were created to enhance human life, yet they ultimately degrade humanity itself. Technology does not protect, it betrays, and unchecked progress leads to collapse. While this theory is definitely controversial, it fits surprisingly well. The mural, the black goo, the engineer's behavior, the recurring themes, it all points to an ancient xenomorph race creating engineers as caretakers and spreaders of their DNA. The fourth theory expands on this by introducing the concept of a singular xenomorph deity, a godlike entity responsible for creating both engineers and space jockeys. So instead of xenomorphs as species creating engineers, there was a singular omnipotent xenogod or goddess that gave birth to the engineers. The mural in Prometheus depicts a divine xenomorph figure. The reverence implied by this imagery may suggest not the worship of xenomorphs as species, but the worship of one creator figure. Supplementary materials including comics introduce the xenomorph goddess that manifests in dreams, particularly among those infected or impregnated. This entity appears less as a physical being and more as a consciousness, a hive mind that transcends individual organisms. This could be the exact xenogoddess depicted on the mural, a supernatural xenomorph entity that created engineers as its offsprings or disciples. In this context, the black goo can be seen as the blood or derivative of this entity, a means of propagating its influence across the cosmos, an inverted and corrupted analog of the blood of Christ. If that theory seemed radical, the next one is even more unhinged and insane, and far more unsettling in how disturbingly coherent it is. Previous theories only push the question further down the chain. If the xenomorphs or an older space jockey lineage created the engineers, the core problem remains unresolved. It simply relabels the creator. But the question still stands: who created the creator? And the next theory answers that question directly. The fifth theory is so extreme it requires some context first. It all starts with the alien master narrative. This foundational document appears in the Prometheus documentary as the blueprint of the engineer civilization. While not fully realized on screen, it outlines a broader mythology in which engineers eventually transcend their physical form and exit our dimension as creatures of pure energy. Their absence, no engineers returning to LV-223 despite catastrophic events, suggests that their civilization may have evolved beyond the need of physical presence. If the engineers achieved mastery not only of spatial dimensions, but also of the time dimension, then this leads to the time paradox theory. The engineers are both the creators and the creations of humanity. And before you think that it's completely absurd, Alien Romulus gives us an undeniable hint. The cycle begins with humans experimenting with the black goo. In Romulus, by combining the goo with human DNA, a new form emerges, the offspring, one that resembles early versions of the engineers. In Romulus, Rook specifically indicates that the Z01 pathogen, a synthesized version of the black goo, is designed to upgrade humans. The first iteration produces the offspring, which is already strikingly similar to an engineer. This suggests a clear progression. Subsequent iterations of the Z01 could become more refined, eventually transforming humans into early proto-engineers, pale, tall, and dark-eyed. At some point, likely driven by the need to improve survival in space colonization, an entire colony on a distant planet may choose to undergo this drastic upgrade. In doing so, they inject the black goo and transform into pale humanoid beings, the engineers, therefore becoming a distant offshoot of humanity. This colony completely cuts ties with its human origin and continues to evolve, ultimately becoming the engineers seen in Prometheus, eventually developing advanced technologies and transcending physical and temporal limitations. Then at some point in the distant future, the engineers travel back in time to 3.2 billion BC to seed life on Earth, initiating the very process that paradoxically leads to their own existence. This creates a closed loop with no clear beginning or end. The near-identical DNA between humans and engineers is no longer a mystery. It is a direct consequence of this cyclical origin. The sacrificial engineer in the opening scene of Prometheus is not a true ancestor, but a future descendant completing the loop by initiating the humanity's existence. In this framework, the question of origin disappears entirely. The creation becomes a self-sustaining cycle. Humans create engineers, engineers return to create humans, and the existence itself functions as an Ouroboros with no point outside the loop. Even though I would say this theory is the most extreme, Romulus in a surprising way makes it more and more plausible. The sixth and final theory embraces the existential mystery rather than attempting to solve it. It proposes that there is no ultimate creator, only an infinite chain of creation exceeding backward and forward without end, a mirror of the infinite universe. Evidence for this perspective appears across the broader franchise. In Alien Dark Descent, the crew discovers an enormous ancient being far larger than any known engineer. This suggests the existence of even older species, each potentially responsible for creating the next. So in this model, creation is an infinite fractal. Humans create androids like David, engineers create humans, space jockeys create engineers, and ancient beings create space jockeys. Each layer gives rise to another with no definitive origin point. So the question of who created the engineers becomes analogous to asking where a circle begins. It is a construct that resists linear explanation. This theory aligns closely with the philosophical tone of Prometheus. The film does not provide answers because its central theme is not discovery, but inquiry. Shaw's question remains unanswered in the end, not because it cannot be answered, but because the act of asking is itself the point. The universe of Alien is not structured around clear hierarchies or origin. It is a network of interdependent creations, each reflecting and reshaping the other. Ultimately, the engineers may be gods, tools, descendants, or reflections, but they are never the final answer. They are just one link in a chain that may extend infinitely in a never-ending fractal of creation. Thank you guys for watching. Let me know which of these theories you think is more plausible. And what do you think about the most radical theories? Leave your thoughts in the comments and don't forget to join the Patreon for extra support, and special thank you to those who already joined. Also, like the video if you enjoyed it and subscribe to the channel for more content. My name is Croft and I'll see you in the next video.